Welcome to the Real Estate Syndication Show. Whether you are a seasoned investor or building a new real estate business, this is the show for you. Whitney Sewell talks to top experts in the business. Our goal is to help you master real estate syndication. And now your host, Whitney Sewell.
Gene Trowbridge and Jonathan Ney, founding partners of the top syndication firm, Trowbridge Law Group, LLP, have a legal team with over 50 years of combined experience in real estate syndication and the practice of real estate securities law. Over this time, Gene and his partners in several past firms and currently have helped clients raise close to $5 billion in offerings by empowering entrepreneurs to raise capital legally. To learn more about Trowbridge Law Group, LLP, visit their website at trowbridgelawgroup.com or follow them on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. This is your daily real estate syndication show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Today our guest is Antony Vicino. Thanks for being on the show, Anthony.
I'm excited to be here, Whitney. I've been listening to your show for a long time, so it's pretty cool to be here.
Awesome. I'm grateful that you listen as well and that you've come to be a guest and add value to all the other listeners and myself. Anthony, I'm grateful for that. But a little about Anthony. He's an author, investor, and small business operator who's helped build several successful companies. He's found success by designing systems at scale, by implementing value-based content marketing strategies, and by delivering exceptional end-user experience. And that's what all of us are working every day towards. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. In 2019, Anthony joined forces with Dan Krueger, who was a previous guest just not too long ago, actually, and formed, and correct me, Anthony, is the name of the business, pronounce it for me.
Invictus Capital.
Invictus, yes.
Yep.
Invictus Capital, and syndicate their first multifamily property. So, Anthony, thank you again for your time. Give us a little bit about your background, how you got to this syndication business, and why, and then let's jump into your superpower.
Yeah, so for me, I got my start back in 2014 passively investing with a friend who was buying just triplexes and quads. So it was kind of a joint venture. And so I was really passive, didn't do anything, just gave some money to it. He was running the operations. And at that point in my career, I didn't really have any interest in real estate per se. It was just an opportunity a friend came with. And so it's like, yeah, let's do that. That sounds great. Fast forward a couple of years later, I'm living in Minnesota, and the story as I tell it, and who knows, I don't know if it's an actual true story, but I have a firm memory of it. I don't know if this is the moment that it clicked in my head, but I was driving down the freeway and I was looking up at the Minneapolis skyline, looking at the skyscrapers, and started to wonder what it takes to actually acquire a skyscraper. Like, what's that look like logistically? And I had no clue at that point. It was just a big, crazy question to try and answer. And so I started working backwards from that crazy far off end state to the place where I was at that moment, which was, an ignorant fool who didn't know anything. And so I was like, okay, what's the next step that I could take to maybe get myself to that place? What would be the next small steps? And that was going and educating myself, learning and reading books, as many as I could get my hands on, listening to as many podcasts as I could, and just immersing myself in the industry to learn what I didn't necessarily even know I didn't know. And then at a certain point, you get to this tipping point where you know enough, but you're still unsure if you know enough. It's really hard to know when you're in that moment if you're actually ready to go.
It's hard to know what you don't know.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I decided to start small. So I went and house hacked a triplex, did an FHA loan, house hacked a triplex so that I could learn the systems, how to deal with tenants, learn how to deal with the city, learn, how to operate a small business, because that's really what these properties are. They're just small, isolated businesses. And I wanted to learn that process and then start scaling up, always knowing that the next step was multifamily and probably syndication in the future. But I wanted to be really confident that I understood what I was doing in the micro level before I expanded it up to the macro. And then fast forward to last year, I met my partner, Dan Krueger, at a networking event here in the Twin Cities. And we just struck up a friendship. And a couple months later, it became very clear that we had a lot of synergy, a lot of complementary skills. He was good at things that I don't enjoy so much, like spreadsheets and numbers and financial stuff, whereas I'm a little bit better at things that he doesn't enjoy. So there was this really good synergy. And we said, okay, how can we work together? And so we decided to syndicate our first property. We closed on that in January of this last year. We formed Invictus Capital with the mindset that, okay, moving forward, we want to scale in syndication because this is a really amazing vehicle, not only for ourselves, but also for our passive investors and friends and families and people that we can bring in and help them expand their investment opportunities and kind of broaden their horizon to what all is out there. So right now, that's what we're doing. We're working to expand here in the Twin Cities. So
congratulations on the deal in January. The first one's always the most difficult, right?
That's what they say. We'll see about the next couple. We'll see how they go. But the first one was interesting because we closed in January, and then a couple months later, COVID happens, right? So the whole world kind of, and that's a really tumultuous time to hop into a big deal like that. And so, you learn as you go, and luckily we're really well capitalized, so we're not in any kind of concern there. But interesting times for sure.
Great. Well, I'd love to dive into your superpower a little bit and just some of the system stuff that you is your part of the business and how you all have scaled and how you've helped even other businesses scale that we can apply to our businesses as well. But let's just jump in a little bit and you lead us a little bit to things we should know or things you've learned about scaling and maybe some systems even through the partnership. I know partnering's it's a big step. Right. And you all made that decision. Maybe you can highlight, was there a process there, how you all said, okay, I know this is a good option or this is good, we should partner because we've done, this due diligence on each other or maybe it just felt right. I don't know. I've heard every story you can think of. But, how did you all know that this, you all should partner? And then, let's jump into some of your skills as far as the systems.
Okay. So as far as the superpower goes, I think for me, maybe creativity and being able to look at problems from alternative angles. So before this, for the last decade, I've been a professional science fiction and fantasy author. So I've written a bunch of novels, and really the process there is, trying to create a world and create characters and tell a story that's captivating and engaging and bringing it all full circle. So what you're doing is you're putting people and characters into interesting situations and then trying to figure out how to get them out of it. And that mental process is really, really helpful when you're talking about businesses and real estate in particular, because you're going to have a lot of issues, a lot of problems that you can't always solve in a straightforward manner. And so being able to come at it creatively, whether that's, trying to close a deal with a seller and think of some creative financing solutions, or, hey, you have some problems with some tenants. What are some creative ways that we can bridge this gap so that we can, meet on equal terms here? And so I think that's one of my superpowers, is just being able to look at a problem set and say, what are the different directions we could attack this from?
Some of that, I think, goes back to the mindset too, right? Knowing that, or believing that there's options before you tell yourself there's not.
Yeah, it goes back to Rich Dad, Poor Dad, right? There's a scene in there where he's talking about walking along the beach with his rich dad, and it's something about the conversation was some people say, I can't do this, and other people say, how can I do this? And so really changing that mindset and shifting to a position of, there is a solution here. It's just a matter of how deep we're going to dig to find it, how creative we're going to be to excavate it, but it is there if you're looking for it. And so really take the can't out of your equation and substitute how. And I think that's a really powerful mental shift.
And it's hard. It's harder than it seems, right? It seems so simple. You say that, but it's hard to change that mindset. But it's so powerful, so powerful. So let's jump in a little bit to your all's, some systems that you all put in place, or tell me a little bit about, when, I don't know, the types of systems that's been so productive or helped you all to move forward.
Yeah, for us right now, because their deal flow kind of dried up in the last couple of months, as everybody kind of put on the brakes and was waiting. And so we've been working very diligently in the last couple of months to build out our educational thought leadership platform, so we can put out content that's valuable to people, passive investors or other active investors, and forge those relationships. And one of the things that I've learned the hard way in past business operations is you need to start from the beginning with the end in mind, and start building from the very beginning the desired end state. And what I see a lot, and I've done this myself, is you start building the business and you do everything yourself, and you're not systematizing it, you're not writing it down and trying to improve on it. You just know the ways that you do the thing. And so that could be, hey, I start a podcast and I'm going to do all the editing, I'm going to do all the cleanup and the posting and all of the advertising and pushing it out into the world. Well, that only scales so far. And then what you end up doing at some point is you get to this tipping point where, okay, we're big enough where this isn't a good use of my time anymore. Now I need to pass it off to somebody else. But you find yourself with the difficulty of, I don't actually know what all I do because I've never really sat down and thought about it or written it out. So I have nothing to hand somebody else and say, here you go, follow these directions and you can do X, Y, and Z. And so across the business, whether we're talking about the marketing side or the deal flow side or any aspect of it, you really need to be starting with the end in mind and saying, I don't want to be in this seat doing this thing forever. And so that presumes at some point we're going to hire somebody, we're going to put somebody into that seat. And to enable them to succeed and win at their job, it's going to be really helpful if they can from day one know what the rules are and how to execute it well. And so that's what we're building from in everything that we do. And you can use a lot of technology and systems to help improve, but really at the foundation of it is it's never too soon to start documenting what you're doing. And that way you can really look at that and say, okay, of these things, what's the highest and best use of my time? Because when you first start into business, you're doing everything. And you're not even realizing that a lot of it's actually a really poor use of your unique skills and abilities, and it's a little bit of a drain. So just even writing it out and saying, this is everything that I'm responsible for, this is everything Dan's responsible for. What of these things do we not actually need to be doing? What could we outsource? What could we do, push onto a VA or maybe into an intern, or who do we need to hire to do this thing who's maybe even better at it than we are?
You know, I love how you said too, just like never too soon to start documenting your systems and documenting what you're doing and how you do things. I could not agree more. But tell me, that's a difficult step for a lot of people. It's like, well, I don't want to train somebody, or they're not going to work for me very long, and I've just wasted all that time. And I hear stuff like that all the time, and I had to go through that personally myself. So, what was that like for you? Have you all hired people? Have you all, brought people on to take over different tasks?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're heavily utilizing VAs right now and interns. So we have an intern, Ethan, who's helping us out in a lot of different aspects. And so one of my other ventures that I participate in is a light manufacturing company. And that's a lot of labor. There's 15 employees, and we're trying to produce widgets that go out the door. And what we failed to do there from the very beginning was build something that was going to scale really easily. So in years 3, 4, when we started scaling really aggressively, we started to feel the growing pains. And we said, okay, well, if we could go back and do this again, we would have built this with the end better in mind. And so what Dan and I are doing is learning from that lesson and being really proactive and getting ahead of that. And to your point, yeah, I find they get kind of deer in headlights when you say, hey, document your systems. They go, I don't even know I don't have a system. I don't know what that means. And it can just be as simple as, hey, every day I check my emails and this is how I do it. This is how I respond to people, or this is what flags I put on them and how I intend to get back to them. And start small. It doesn't have to be a really big, crazy system. It could just be as simple as step 1, this, step 2, this, step 3, this. The simplest checklist, boom, you're ready to go. And so start small. You'll get better at it over time. And you got to disconnect yourself from this idea of like, this is a waste of my time. Because at minimum, let's say you do hire somebody and it's awful. You decide, nope, I need to do this myself. Well, by documenting your process, one of the really interesting things that occurs is you start to notice what you could improve, because by putting it down onto paper or into a document format, you can observe the whole thing from the bird's eye, which is very hard to do when you're actually in the moment, in the micro moment of doing the thing. You don't notice a lot of the inefficiencies. And so when you put it all down, you go, actually, maybe there's a better way I could bundle all these tasks together in this more efficient way. So at minimum, you just become better at the thing rather than worrying about bringing somebody else to take over that task.
I'm taking notes.
Notes are good. I like it.
Yeah, no, it's good stuff. I was just, want to document some of this stuff because you're saying, what you just said, you don't notice the inefficiencies if you don't document it, if you're not writing it down, where you can, have that bird's eye view on the process. I think that's really very well said. Tell me, how did you, what were some of the first systems that you started to document, or maybe some things that we should be thinking about documenting so that we're probably very inefficient with, or certain processes?
Yeah, I think marketing is a big one. Building out a thought leadership platform and putting out content consistently. That's the big challenge for people, is putting out content, but doing it consistently, because it takes a lot of time to be creative and generate an article or a podcast or a video. And then, disseminating it to the world consistently in an effective manner is very difficult a lot of times. And so what Dan and I did from the very beginning was we took a step back and really tried to say, okay, how can we create the most amount of content with the least amount of work possible? And the solution that you inevitably come to is, okay, let's make macro content that then we can splice into micro content from there. So maybe that's we do an hour-long podcast or a video that then we can splice into smaller bits, and then we can offshoot this little phrase and create some infographics, and then this bit we can make an article about. And so you can generate hundreds of pieces of content from that one macro pillar piece of content, but then utilizing the technology to be consistently putting it out there. So that could be, a social media auto poster, or having a VA who helps go in there every day and like make the post and engage with the content. And that's the hardest part, I think, is from a social media standpoint, to get the most traction, you have to view social media marketing as this social thing, right? Like there's people that you're inviting over to dinner, you're putting a plate of food in front of them, and then you're leaving the room. That's a really weird thing to do, right? And so don't think about putting your content out there in the world in the same way. You have to put the food down on the table, then you have to sit down and engage in a conversation with people. When somebody says, hey, this spaghetti was great, you don't just go thumbs up, right? Like have a conversation. Hey, I appreciate that a lot. Like, what did you find helpful about it? Or what are your thoughts on this aspect, right? Like it's a conversation. And people like that by and large, because that's what they're there to do on social media. So those are the things that you can't really they don't scale well. It's like hand-to-hand combat. You have to be in the trenches doing that stuff, but recognize that the actual disseminating and creating content can be done in a more efficient macro way. So that's what Dan and I from the very beginning have kind of set up, is saying, how do we minimize how much time per week we have to spend on this task while getting the most bang for our buck?
Great advice. And I wanted to ask you too, you had mentioned y'all are using VAs and interns. Where are you finding them? I've used VAs a long time, but never used an intern. I would say we've had one, but ultimately haven't sought out people, as interns. So how have you all found VAs and interns?
So the VAs, we're using Fiverr and Upwork, and there's so many sites out there that you can find good VAs. The trick is, the hardest part of any business that I've always found is people. Communicating clear expectations and accountabilities and how you win at your job. You think that you're being very clear, but very often it's not getting across. And I find the biggest struggle regardless. And so that's always going to be there. And recognize when you're working with a VA, that's the same thing. So the more that defined you have the tasks and more narrow that you can make it, the person can understand and execute it up to your expectations. That's hard to do in general. So just kind of be patient with them and with yourself. It might take a while till you find somebody that you really click with, but once you do, they're gold. Like you'll look at it and say, I don't know how I ever did this without this person. They're so great. With interns are a different story, because interns have typically sought us out. So they might be college students who are interested in getting into real estate at some point, and they'll reach out and say, we'd like to learn from you. And so it's a more reciprocal relationship than with a VA, where our goal is to, how do we educate this person and make them as competent in this industry as possible so that they can move forward and be successful. And so their goal is to try and be helpful to us. And so we're not necessarily grading their efforts based off of how effective they are in that way. We're using it more of like, how much value are we adding to each other? Are we being effective in growing this person? Are they effective in learning? And so we have a little bit more patience with interns in general than with a VA, where it's a little bit more transactional. But by and large, I find maybe something about this younger generation. I don't know. They seem hungry and they seem really outgoing, and our generation too, I think, but maybe I just lived it, so I don't have like the same perspective. But we've been approached by a lot of kids coming out of college that are interested in learning more. And so I find, that's a great avenue.
What kind of tasks are you giving them, and how are you training them?
So as simple tasks as possible. And that could be, hey, we have this video, or last night we did a webinar. So we do a weekly roundtable. We want you to take that hour-long piece of content, watch it, learn whatever that topic is that we're talking about that night, but then splice it up into 1 little minute sections, right? So take a note, this little section was really helpful. This section was really helpful. And that's helpful for us, because then we don't have to listen to it. We don't have to give it to a VA who maybe doesn't have industry context. And so they might have a really hard time of knowing what pieces of information are actually useful and which ones aren't. And, the intern, maybe they'll come up with 15 pieces of content out of that hour. that we can then recycle in 1-minute clips on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube. And then maybe some of those won't be very good, but then you can have a conversation and say, okay, this is the audience that we're targeting, and this is what we're looking for, and this is why this one won't work. Whereas you can't really have that conversation so easily with a VA, I find, just because they're very good at giving me a very specific task, and I will execute it very within a narrow parameter. So with the interns, we keep them on that type of task. That's very helpful for us. Or outreach and saying, hey, we'd like to talk to this guest on this podcast. Can you go reach out to them, have a conversation, let them know that we'd love to have them? Or maybe just go get their contact information, field that stuff for us so that we can do the reach out ourselves, and we can just be more effective when we do so. So we keep them on low level, simple tasks of that nature that then we're building their competency in tasks that are always helpful, right? Which is like, how do you go collect the data, the information on this person? How do you outreach to them effectively and not just in a creepy, weird way, so that you're adding value to them? And it sounds easy, but I think we've all been on LinkedIn long enough, and we've gotten enough of those emails from people just kind of spamming and saying, here's my services. Do you want to buy? That we all know it's like, that, don't be that person. But it's hard to know the alternative and what that looks like without training.
Yeah, I spend no time on those messages whatsoever.
No. If you spend no time getting to know me and what I'm doing, then I'm not going to jump right into learning about you. It's just human nature.
So what are a couple tips, though, to start that conversation with somebody while we're on that?
Well, I think you need to go into it and understand, like, again, with anything, is understand what's your desired end state. Like, when I reach out to this person, what do I really want to happen? Maybe it's a sell, but if that's the place that you're starting from, then you're going to have a really shallow, empty relationship. So take a step back from that, do a little bit of research, just take a second, look at their profile, have a moment to look at it in a way that says, what can I do to add value to this person? Where do I see the commonalities? Why am I reaching out to this person? Why would they want to have a conversation with me? And I think if you approach it from that perspective of why should they want to have a conversation with me, and not just, hey, if you want to talk to me because I'm going to make you money, like, that's wrong, right? Like, nobody believes that right off the bat. So you need to come at it from a more authentic way. So that could be, maybe doing a little bit of research and saying, hey, I see you have a podcast. That's really cool. I just listened to this episode, really enjoyed these questions that you ask. So show the person that you're engaged in, and that you've already taken that step, and they're going to go, wow, that's really cool. Because I find kind of rare on social media these days. Like, people don't take the time to really get to know the person. And so just try to treat it as not a transaction, that you're trying to build a relationship, because real estate is, by and large, it's a we game, not a me game. And the more that you can put the other person first in any engagement, and this goes back to one of the things I'm really passionate about, is never losing sight of that end user experience. And the end user is the person that you're talking to. Like, what are they experiencing right now? Are they learning? Is this good for them, or is this all about me? And if it's all about me, then that's the wrong angle to come at it from.
Give us a couple of ways that you've recently improved that end user experience, or how you've got there. Help us get there.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one. Right now, one of the things that we can do is, because we're putting out a lot of educational content, and specifically in the form of like podcasting and videoing, or in videos, not videoing, we're able to give other people a platform to engage and talk on. And content creation is always difficult. And I think this is one of the reasons that people don't do it consistently. And so one of the things that we're trying to look at through the lens of, if we're reaching out to another active investor, which isn't really our target market, if you think about it, like, we ideally want passive investors and brokers and people that can get deals and lenders. And so, but if you go directly really hard at that, then you have a way of just kind of scaring them away. So what we like to do is just say, hey, come and have a conversation. Let us learn from you. And in the meantime, what we'll do then is we'll create this content together that you can use on your platforms, and we'll do the work to splice it up and give you some sound bites and whatnot that you can use on your YouTube, on your Facebook, your LinkedIn. And then people go, okay, cool. I don't have to do anything but show up and have a conversation. Well, that sounds cool. I can do that.
How do you wish you had built the business differently, having the end in mind, like we've been discussing?
Yeah, I think the hardest part is knowing when to hire. I think that's, by and large, something people struggle with a lot, and I've struggled with it in the past, is thinking, I'm not ready. We don't have the cash flow to support this, or there's not enough tasks. I can do it myself. And that's always a really difficult one. I think, yes, standardizing the process, but there comes a point when you just have to pull the trigger and say, we're bringing that person in. And by and large, I find it's better to hire sooner than later, because when you hire sooner, you don't know how much you have for that person or how much they can add to the process until they're actually in the seat and you go, oh, wow, that was worth it. Now, with that said, hiring is also very difficult, and it's really hard to find somebody that's going to hit it out of the park on day one. And so a lot of patience and training and understanding goes a long way. So like, this person's new to your organization, don't expect the moon out of them on day one. How do you coach and train them so that they understand what it looks like to win at their job? And that just goes back to the standardizing of processes and saying, this is the process. If you execute this, you're going to rock. If you can improve this process, even better. That's awesome.
Hiring sooner.
Yep.
Yeah, could not agree more. So what about, Anthony, what's been the hardest part of just this syndication journey for you?
Oh, that's a great question. Right now, the deal flow is a little light. It's starting to come back on the market. We have a couple opportunities in the pipeline. I think that's tricky. But I would say, by and large, again, with business in general, it's always people. People are hard. And understanding that everybody has a unique perspective and a unique want and unique desire. And whether you're dealing with investors, you're dealing with brokers, you're dealing with sellers, trying to put yourself in their position and understand the world from their perspective as much as possible is always, I find, I'm not naturally that person. Some people are really, really good at it naturally, and they're just gifted at it. I'm not, so I have to work really hard at putting myself in the other person's shoes and seeing the world through their eyes. But by and large, if you want to, I think, succeed in syndication, you have to develop that skill, because everything that you're going to do is an extension of how well you can work with and through other people.
Extension of how well you can work with and through other people. That's very well spoken. So Anthony, what's your best source right now for finding new investors?
Yeah, so that's interesting, actually. We put out a lot of content across all the social media platforms. The podcast we started a couple months ago, and that's gained good traction. That's been great. But the thing is, like, Dan and I don't look at trying to find people per se. We just we look at it from the perspective of how can we put out as much value into the universe, trusting that then it will somehow come back. And for us, that's putting out educational content consistently that doesn't come with any strings attached or any expectations. Just saying, hey, do you want to learn more about this? Here's some information about it. Take it at your own speed. And that's been really effective for us in getting investors in our first deal and moving forward. We've had a lot of people reach out now just based on that, because we don't want to convince people. We don't want to sell people. We just want to naturally attract them because they like our message. They like how we say it. And that's really, I think, the best kind of marketing by and large, is find your tribe of people that enjoy the way that you communicate and just keep bringing them value, and you can't go wrong.
What's the number one thing that's contributed to your success?
So I would say hyperfocus. I have ADHD. And so the thing with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is, it's not that you don't have the ability to focus. It's that when you get focused on something, you can go into this hyper-focused state. And you don't always have a say over what that thing is going to be that you're really focused on in that moment. So for me, it's been about creating systems and routines and habits that make it more likely that when I go into a hyper-focused state, it's going to be on something beneficial, like writing an article or writing a book or doing a podcast, rather than watching the paint dry. And so that hyper-focused state coupled with habits has been really, really helpful.
And how do you like to give back?
I really like education and working with people towards their goals. So I'm very much a one-on-one type of person. And to that, I think there's 4 spheres of influence for us to work on as individuals. That's mindset, health, wealth, and communication. And so I like to help people, regardless of which place that they're in. If that's mindset and getting your mind focused in the right direction, because that's the lens that we see the world through, right? And if your lens is scratched or scuffed, then it's going to affect how you move through the world. Same with health, right? Your body is the vehicle carrying you through. So you need to take care of that and eat right and exercise right. Wealth is also critical, because if you don't have money, well, money doesn't, solve all problems, but it solves all money problems. And so getting to a baseline of financial security or literacy is critical. And then communication is, we all want to be understood, right? We all want to be accepted and feel like we matter. And a big part of that is being able to effectively communicate your wants and desires to the people around you, and also to reciprocate that, because, over 50% of communication is just listening to the other person and understanding their message. So those are the aspects that I try to focus on a lot. And I have a blog, the Hyper Focus Mind, that I work with people through to develop those areas.
Nice. Yeah. Mindset, health, wealth, communication. You get those things down, you're doing okay, aren't you?
Yeah. Everything kind of falls together after that. It just, and it's not complicated. It's very simple things. It's difficult to execute, but consistent small daily actions goes a really long way.
That's for sure. That's kind of like the compound effect, right? I don't know if you read that book or not, but
yeah, Darren Hardy. Yeah.
There you go. Well, Antony, I'm grateful for your time. Grateful for you just being on the show and just the different things you've listed out. Excuse me, things you've told us about. I mean, how you all have scaled different systems, and you're hiring interns and VAs, and where you found them, how you're training them. It's like hiring sooner. We need to be hiring sooner, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, just grateful for your sharing your expertise. Tell the listeners how they can get in touch with you and learn more about you.
Yeah, so if you want to go over and check us out, we are at invictuscapitalventures.com. Right now, we have a 20-page guide called the Quick Start Guide to Passive Investing in Multifamily. So if you're interested, whether you're active or you're passive, you're interested in learning more about how to have conversations with passive investors, or if you're a passive investor wanting to learn what is this all about, that's going to be a really great resource. You can check us out on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube. Just go and search for Invictus Capital, or Multifamily Investing Made Simple is the podcast.
Thank you for listening to the Real Estate Syndication Show, brought to you by LifeBridge Capital. LifeBridge Capital works with investors nationwide to invest in real estate, while also donating 50% of its profits to assist parents who are committing to adoption. LifeBridge Capital, making a difference, one investor and one child at a time. Connect online at www.lifebridgecapital.com for free material and videos to further your success.